First verse is a praise to Buddha Gautama, it says, but it means Shakyamuni Buddha, praised by Nagarjuna. This is a praise His Holiness usually begins his teachings and public talks with. And it's praising the Buddha for teaching emptiness. And then there's a verse from the Dhammapada where the Buddha summarizes the essence of his own teachings. And then there's a short mandala offering. And then we'll do the four immeasurable thoughts. And then the verse of refuge and bodhicitta. So if you like, if you're familiar with already, why don't we take a moment and just focus our attention. Just sit comfortably and yeah, focus your attention inwards on an object of meditation. And then if you like, you can visualize Shakyamuni Buddha as the field of refuge in the space in front of you, or, just imagine the presence of an enlightened being or any object of faith in the space in front of you. Mm. It's funny now. Just, yeah, just thinking about, I mean, yeah, I've been practicing Buddhism a long time, so it's just second nature to visualize, the Buddha or my teachers in the space in front, imagine their presence there and reflect on their qualities. But for so many people who don't believe in that kind of thing, then, yeah, I think, especially these days when, you know, in the history of humanity, we're so much more developed. I mean, we have so much more advanced technology, much higher, on average, much higher standard of living. And on the scale of the global scale, we're much more interconnected with anywhere, much more interconnected, than ever before. And we can travel with greater ease than ever before. You can travel halfway around the world in a day now at relatively little expense. So I think all that together, and most of us have, or especially here, I guess most of us have a decent education. At least are literate, know how to read and write. Most people in the world are literate. So I don't know. I think it's easy to get a bit arrogant now, thinking that we're kind of the smartest beings around. We're compared to, especially in a developed country like the US, but even in a less developed country, because compared to all the animals, no? But then, yeah, you can easily kind of think we're the top dog and there's no one higher or more intelligent uh, than us humans. But yeah, I find it's very, I don't know. It's very helpful to have the perspective that there are beings that are much more wise and mature and compassionate and patient and understanding than we are, than have a much higher level of yeah, development. Even I mean, even among humans, there definitely are. And then to kind of invoke their presence and relate to them with sort of admiration and faith. It helps lift one higher still, I think, help one develop one's own potential to be a better person. So with that attitude, then yeah, visualizing Shakyamuni Buddha or any other object of your faith in the space in front, and imagining their presence there, and kind of opening your mind to being inspired by their enlightening influence. And then also, it's good if you can visualize or imagine all other sentient beings with whom we're interconnected with in this life from day to day, past lives, and we will be in future lives. So imagine all other sentient beings, all the humans, animals, and then beings of other realms, hell beings, hungry ghosts, gods and demigods, and imagine them all around you. And remember how you're connected, interconnected with them in different ways as your family, your mother and father, brothers, sisters, extended family. And then those we have an antagonistic relationship with, whom we dislike or who dislike us. Usually visualize them seated in front, facing towards us, as a way of remembering to practice patience and tolerance towards them. And then all the other sentient beings around. So we visualize like this in order to remember just the fact of our dependence upon others, our interconnectedness with others, and then especially as we engage in a virtuous action, to think that I'm engaging in this action not only to benefit myself, but in order to benefit countless others who've been kind to me, directly and indirectly, time and again, in countless past lives. And all these beings who are the objects of affection and loving concern of countless enlightened beings. Mm. And it's only independence upon myself generating a loving concern for all, each and every one of these sentient beings without excluding one, that I myself can become enlightened. Mm. Okay, so then we can read this praise to the Buddha. Compelled by great compassion, you taught the sacred Dharma to dispel all wrong views. To you, the Buddha Gautama, I pay homage. Do not commit any unwholesome actions. Engage in perfect wholesome actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And then we can read the mandala offering in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Niratayami. And then we can read together this prayer of the four immeasurable thoughts, means immeasurable equanimity, and then immeasurable love, and then immeasurable compassion, and immeasurable joy. This last one. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to abide in equanimity, free from attachment to friends and anger towards enemies. May they abide in equanimity. I myself will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will cause them to have these. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from suffering and its causes. I myself will cause them to be free from these. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to never be separated from the happiness which is totally beyond suffering. May they never be separated from this. I myself will cause them to be never separated from this. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. And then the verse of refuge and bodhicitta. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections from explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections of explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections from explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Yeah, so in line with that, or whatever, your own way of thinking, then generate a, a positive motivation for the session. Reflecting on why am I here participating in this session. And generate the most powerful possible positive motivation that you can. Thinking for the sake of yourself and for the sake of countless others. Mm, Okay, so then we continue. Maybe I wanted to point out actually in this first verse, how it speaks about compassion and emptiness. This praise to the Buddha. So this verse is from, yeah, it's by Nagarjuna, Arya Nagarjuna, which is who, he's a great Indian Buddhist master who lived about 500 years after the Buddha passed away. And he was, you can probably say, wrote the first, and this is from his text. In English, it's called Root Wisdom. In Sanskrit, there's a Sanskrit title, Mula Madhyamaka Karika. Um, yeah. So this is one of the first great treatises or commentaries on the Buddha's view. I mean, the Buddha's teaching on selflessness, especially as it was taught in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which is part of the Mahayana canon. Um, yeah, I don't remember. I didn't put the chapter and verse number there. It's not from the first chapter. It's from one of the later chapters. I think chapter 17 maybe. But yeah, but Nagarjuna, it's called Root Wisdom. Yeah, this is Nagarjuna is considered to have taught the definitive view. The Shakyamuni Buddha during his lifetime, he gave different explanations related to emptiness, different interpretations of what's the final view of emptiness according to the needs of the audience that he was speaking to. Um, so, um, yeah, but independent, so on using reason and logic and comparing these different views, then Nagarjuna kind of went through many of the different teachings the Buddha gave on dependent arising and selflessness or emptiness. And then delineated what's the correct view of emptiness. But here he's praising in this verse. What I wanted to point out mainly is that he's praising Shakyamuni Buddha for his both his compassion, but especially for his wisdom in teaching emptiness. And so he says, first he mentions the Buddha's own motivation. He says, compelled by great compassion, right? So he's saying compelled by great compassion. I mean, what compelled the Buddha to teach, especially to teach about emptiness, was compassion for sentient beings. You know, observing, his own mother, father, his wife and son, his siblings, his family, and then countless strangers, other human beings, also animals, whatever sentient beings there are. Then the Buddha observing them and seeing how they suffer, and wishing to do something to help them, right, to free them from suffering. Then that was the whole reason for the Buddha leaving the royal life and his kind of life of privilege, and then going forth as a renunciate and practicing meditation with great hardship on austerity, and then the rest of his life living a very simple life of a beggar, begging for food, living in very simple homes that were offered by others, sleeping outside or living in simple huts, and then devoting his life to teaching others meditation and about the path of spiritual development that he himself had realized. So why did he do all that? Because he's compelled by great compassion. So Nagarjuna praises him for that, compelled by great compassion, then says, you taught the sacred Dharma. But here the word that's translated here is sacred Dharma. Kangi tukshin nerzunde dawa tamje bambe che dambe döni is dambe dön. Dambe döni dönze pa. Yeah, the one you taught the dambe dön. So I'm reciting in Tibetan. Kangi tukshin nerzunde is you who's compelled by great compassion. Dawa tamje bambe che. In Tibetan, actually, the second line is in order to dispel all wrong views. They put it as the third line here just because it works better in English. But he says, in order to dispel all wrong views, um, which means ignorance, wrong understandings, which is one of the main things we look at in this module, but a specific type of wrong view, which is the root of all suffering, is, one of the Buddha's fundamental teachings, that there's a specific wrong view, a specific type of misunderstanding, which is ignorance grasping at things, at ourself and other things, existing in a way that they actually don't exist in. So in order to dispel wrong views, and specifically the wrong view or ignorance, which is the root of samsara, then he says, Tampe döni donzeba. So you taught the sacred Dharma. So, but actually a little more literal translation is the sacred meaning, right? But here, but that phrase, Tampe dön, Tamdön, it also, those two syllables, Tambedön, they also have the connotation of an ultimate meaning, like ultimate truth. From within the two truths, there's conventional truth and ultimate truth, where ultimate truth is the ultimate nature of the most fundamental kind of characteristic of all things, the way they exist. Um, and so, and it really means emptiness. I mean, it's alluding to emptiness. It doesn't say the word emptiness, but that phrase, Tampe Dön, means like the most sacred truth, the most sacred meaning, or the most profound meaning, which in the Buddhist worldview is emptiness. So why is the view of emptiness the most sacred meaning? Because that's the only meaning, the only truth which by understanding that we can be utterly freed from suffering, right? Any other truth, it can help in many ways, like the truth of that past and future lives exist, or that karma, that we experience suffering and happiness because of karma that we ourselves create. Yes, those are good things to understand. Those are very helpful. That anger is always is destructive for us and destructive for others, and that we can abandon afflictive emotions. That when others harm us, that they're doing so because they're controlled by afflictive emotions in their mind. They're all different truths to understand that are all very helpful, but none of those can cause us to be free from suffering ultimately in such a way that it'll never return again, because none of those are the antidote to the ultimate root of suffering. So none of those are the ultimate truth, right? They're all conventional truths, whereas emptiness is the only ultimate truth, right? So that's what it means here. When he says you taught the sacred Dharma, it means you taught emptiness. The sacred meaning that by understanding that, gradually you can deepen your familiarity with that and abandon all of your afflictive emotions and be free from samsara and become enlightened. Without understanding that, you can't, right? So that's why it's called the sacred Dharma. So it is compelled by great compassion. Actually, in order to dispel all wrong views, you taught the sacred Dharma. And then for this reason, to you, the Buddha Gautama, I pay homage. It's Nagarjuna's praise. Um, and then I wanted to point out also while we were generating a motivation, I was just thinking, yeah, just to point out the connection between compassion and wisdom, especially wisdom realizing emptiness. Because I think compassion is very easy to see why it's important, and it's a positive attitude. It's something a beneficial attitude for us to develop. You know, caring about ourselves, caring about others, and recognizing the suffering we experience, was recognizing the difficulty and suffering others experience, and just wishing to be free from that is an incredibly precious attitude. Um, Um, but and that attitude, it's said in one sutra, actually a sutra I'll quote later on, the King of Concentration Sutra, which was just recently translated into English just about 5, 6 years ago. It's available for free download at the 84,000 project online. It's a very beautiful sutra and has incredibly beautiful and profound verses about emptiness. But in one verse in that sutra, it says, what the Buddha says, um, yeah, I think he's speaking to Manjushri maybe, but he says something like Manjushri. Um, there's, bodhisattvas don't need to practice many things, right? If they just practice one thing and keep that close to their heart, then they'll develop all possible realizations. What is that one thing? It's great compassion, no? Because Yeah, because by wishing for oneself to be free from suffering, then it causes you to look for how to do that, right? Seeing the suffering of others and feeling a degree of that yourself, feeling empathy, and then wishing to free others from suffering, then that leads you into looking for a way to actually do that, right? And that leads you to realize, looks for it, when you have a caring mind about yourself, a caring mind about others, and you wish to free yourself and others from suffering, that causes you to look for, well, why am I suffering? Why are others suffering? Is there a way to be free from that? If so, how can I do that? How can I work towards that? So that caring attitude itself leads you into developing all the realizations on the path up to enlightenment. And that's why the Buddha says that, that. And yeah, I find that it is quite a relief to think about that verse sometimes, because especially in the Mahayana Buddhism, there's so many different practices. There's different deities. There's all different kind of preliminary practices. There's all different kind of meditations. All different books to read. All different teachings to attend. It can be quite overwhelming. There's so many different things to do. Different Dharma centers to go to, and then different courses to take, and then it's like, what do you do? Well, you focus on compassion. That's what the Buddha says. Don't worry about all the variety of things. Just try to generate a little compassion every day. That'll take you to wherever you need to get to. Um, but then the question comes, yeah, because for so many of us, yeah, compassion is easy to see how beneficial it is for our mind, right? But then emptiness is much more difficult to see. It's much more like an intellectual project, understanding emptiness. And it seems just like much more difficult. And so the question comes, well, why go to all that difficulty understanding emptiness? And how does that relate to the aims of my compassion, right? Well, that's what I just want to explain briefly, is that because, and that's what Nagarjuna is pointing out in this verse. I mean, he's alluding to that. He's not explaining it really, but is well, basically this, because if we want to be free from suffering ourselves, if we want to free others from suffering, then I mean that mind of compassion, then like I was saying, it leads you into wondering, well, what are the causes? Why do I suffer? Why do others suffer? Why do we take birth and then experience old age and experience sickness and then die and be separated from all the people we care about and everything we're familiar with, even our own body and our name and our memories? and then we take rebirth again and start the whole thing over. Like, why are we in that condition? I mean, and what causes us to be in that condition specifically? Um, then the Buddha's answer is because of not understanding emptiness, basically having a mind that grasps at things as existing in the very opposite way from the correct view of ultimate truth, right? So, and so it's only in order to fulfill our wish to free ourselves and others from suffering, we have to understand emptiness ourselves, and then we have to teach it to others. That's the only way. So, of course, I'm not asking you, believe that because you've come here and I'm sitting here on a little higher than you and I'm saying that. No, but that's what the Buddha taught, and it's a big question for us. Is that true? We should take it as a question. Is that true? And why or why not? And so that's what I want to lead you a little bit into today is how to question that and check for ourselves in relation to our own experience. And then meditate, yeah, a bit on emptiness, a bit more on emptiness in addition to what we did last week. But but so in one way, you think of compassion and emptiness. How do they relate? So in one way they relate is because if we have compassion for ourselves, if we have compassion for others, and we actually want to free ourselves and others from compassion, then what the Buddha is saying is you have to realize emptiness, right? And so in that way, emptiness is related to compassion. But then I mean, and so in that way you can say compassion leads to the analysis of emptiness, leads to effort to understand emptiness. But then from the side of emptiness, does it go in the other direction? Does emptiness lead you to compassion somehow? And I would say yes, definitely. And it's quite different though, because the flip side, emptiness is like one side of a coin, right? The other side of the coin is dependent arising, that things exist in dependence upon other things, right? Like you think of us as a person, how are we a dependent arising? Well, first of all, from you think of we began in this life. Most of us when we think of I, we're thinking of the I of this life, right? When did we begin? At the time of conception. When our mother's sperm and egg came together, and then our body began growing. That's the beginning of this life for us, right? So then, where the first two parts of us came from someone else, right? Our mother and father, right? Without those, we wouldn't exist, right? So just the very beginning of our body was parts of other people's bodies, no, their sperm and egg, and then from there, we were nourished by our mother's blood for 9 months while we were in her womb, and so all the food that she consumed and those, she digested became nutrients in her bloodstream, and that's what nourished our physical body. And then as our mental capacity grew, then all all the understanding as we develop all our understanding, say from the time maybe in the womb is a bit more difficult to imagine, although we were developing some understanding in the womb already, but especially after we're born, then it's easy. How did we learn language? Again, from mostly our mother and our father, our parents, other family. All the language that we're able to speak, it's all that we learned from other people. If there hadn't been other people teaching us those things, how to speak, we would probably we wouldn't be able to, right? If we didn't have language, then how many of the ideas that we have now we wouldn't have, right? Like even if you think our own ideas, no, where did they came from? Mostly from other people, no? Not that we don't create any original ideas, but they're all a synthesis of other ideas that we've heard, from other people. I would I would suggest that again, all these things you have to question. And then, of course, all the air. We live in dependence upon water and air. Did we create the air we breathe? No. Did we create the water we drink? No. Did we create, even most of the food we eat? Did we grow that or enable it, food to be grown on Earth? Like, no, it all comes from others. No, so everything we have, everything we are, it all comes from others. So that's dependent arising, right? And it's empty, and that's the flip side of emptiness. So they go hand in hand. Like, why is Buddha saying we're all empty of existing from our own side? Because we're dependently arisen, because we exist in dependence upon others. So that very view of, you can't understand emptiness without understanding dependent arising, and you can't understand dependent arising at the deepest level without understanding emptiness, right? Um, so that understanding of emptiness in that way, together with dependent arising, that leads us to recognize how our lives are deeply interconnected with the lives of countless others. And that naturally leads to gratitude, for others. And that naturally leads to caring about others. When we see that actually what I am is not something separate from the lives of countless others. Actually, at the deepest at a deepest level, like what I am. Sorry, I should stop sharing now. Um, what at the deepest level, like what I am, is something interconnected with the lives of countless others, um, and so and so I should care about them. So to just care about myself alone at the exclusion of caring about others is completely ridiculous in a way. In the view of emptiness, that just doesn't make sense at all. No. Um, so in that way, the view of emptiness and dependent arising also naturally leads you to having more compassion for others. Mm. So in that way, emptiness and the view of emptiness and compassion, yeah, they mutually support each other in a very profound way. Um, yeah. Maybe any questions about anything I've explained so far? Yes, Glenn.
Keshla, can you please
1 minute, Madhu. Glenn here has a question, and then I'll come back. Need the mic so the people online can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Mhm.
Okay. Is that close enough?
That's close. That's close.
Or
Yeah.
is that too close?
No, that's good. That's
Oh,
good. Yeah,
okay.
it was clear then. Oh, go ahead.
The flip side, I'm still trying to understand what that means. Are we empty and dependent arising?
Oh, yeah, excellent. Yeah, I'm coming to that. That
Okay.
will come to. That's like the main thing we need to understand over the next 5 weeks now. But yes, they go. It's why are we empty? Because we're dependent arising. Yeah. But that I'll come back to that. But yeah, just hold that question in mind. All of you, hold Glenn's question in your mind. How are dependent arising and emptiness related? Yes. But that is the question. So, but yeah, hold that in mind, and then everything we talk about will be related to that. And and follow up if it's not becoming more clear. But it will be. It'll become more clear. But I mean, if I can say just one thing to maybe make it a bit more clear. Well, this will help a lot, I think. So why I'm saying, okay, um, yeah, if you put in a formal syllogism like you can think in relation to yourself. I, the person, am empty because I'm a dependent arising, right? So dependent arising is the reason to establish that we're empty. But then, okay, but when we mean empty, remember I mentioned last week, we mean empty of what? We're not like, it's true I'm empty of being a cat, but that's not particularly important. I'm empty of, being a tree, but okay, so what? You know. But in Buddhism, we're talking about emptiness. We're talking about empty of existing as an independent thing. So that empty as existing as something independent or on its own, separate from, without relying upon anything else other than me. Right? So Buddha's saying that we all have a kind of um, um, I don't know. It's like an ancient propensity to feel this way. That at the core of me as a person, there is some essence which doesn't depend upon anything else. It's just it just is there. So in the Christian worldview, you'd call this like the soul, right? Right. And in other religious traditions, maybe other things, atma, in Sanskrit. But but yeah, that's the and that idea, that sense. It's not really like an idea like we think this is so. It's more like an intuitive feeling that this is so, right? And that belief that that is true, that there is some core essence to us that doesn't depend upon anything else. It exists in and of its own right, independently, by its own power. Without, by its own power means it's not, something exists by its own power. It doesn't rely upon anything else for its power. It has its own, it's self-sustaining in a way, totally self-sufficient, self-sustaining. And so, and independent. So that's the opposite of interdependent. If at our very core, everything we are depends upon others, then there is no what is there that exists just by its own power from its own side? Just like I was saying, if you look through your ideas and think, can you find one thought or idea that I have which is totally original, in no way depends upon anybody else or anything else, is something totally original, I alone have that idea without depending upon, not only we do have original ideas, but an idea that is in no way dependent upon anything else I've heard from anyone else or perceived at all. No, you can't find. No, I guarantee. Ask. It's an important to go through. Looking. But so the Buddha is saying there's you can look, and this is part of the meditation we'll do. We look through all the parts of us as a person, all the parts of our body. Is there any that exists completely independently of anything else? And you can look through all the parts of your mind. Is there any part of my conscious experience that exists completely independently, not only of other people, but of other things, of air, of water, from independent from air, independent from light, independent from the earth, the soil, independent from plants, independent from, you know, anything, um, the Big Bang, right? Independent from atoms, right? Atoms are not us, right? So, yeah. So the Buddha is saying, no, there's no, so, but that's how emptiness and dependent arising are related in short, because it's when you talk about emptiness, emptiness of what? Emptiness of total independent existence, solitary, self-sustaining existence. So the opposite of that is interdependent existence. Yeah. Okay. Madhu, you still have your hand up?
No, it was the same question.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I was trying to understand what was the definition of emptiness, and then I was trying to apply the
Yeah.
causal cause and effect. If empty, then compassion, and I didn't understand that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's funny, emptiness. Yeah, you're asking what's the definition of emptiness? Because in the whole 20-year study program I did, actually in Tibetan, the word for what we would consider philosophy in English, the word actually means definition, right? So in Tibetan, like the study of philosophy is kind of seen as the study of definitions of things, the meanings of things. Tseni. But emptiness, I don't remember a definition of emptiness. I'm not sure. I don't remember, like, because we memorize and debate so many definitions of things, but I don't remember definition of emptiness. Um, okay. Well, let's. Oh gosh, there's a lot of things in the chat. Oh yeah, that's all about the volume, I think. Okay. Max, you just need to, you monitor the chat and tell me if there's anything I need to know about what's going on there. Okay, great. Then I'm gonna go, let's jump back to where we picked up where we left off, last week. And just review a little bit and then meditate a bit. So I never, we read through this verse last week, but I never explained the kind of the line of words I put above. So that's what we'll work on today. But I'll just read the verse again to spur your memory. Um, and maybe before I do that, I do want to encourage you to do the readings. There's excellent readings with this module that I guess if you've signed up, you've all been sent, I suppose. Yeah, there's different articles, and teachings given by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe, and others about emptiness. So I'm not really referring to those much in these sessions, but they're very helpful support material. So if you read them, it'll be very helpful. Just want to promote that. Okay, so to read this verse. So this again is from the same text by Nagarjuna, the fundamental wisdom on the middle way. It's the same text that I just was speaking about, that verse from, but it's a different translation of the title. He says, by exhausting karma, afflictive emotions, by exhausting karma and afflictive emotions, one is liberated from samsara. Karma and afflictive emotions come from false conceptions. Those come from elaboration of inherent existence. As for elaboration, it is ceased by emptiness or ceased in emptiness. So what I'm pointing out, this line of words I made above, all in bold, is just, actually we'll start from the right side and go backwards. But because that's the order that Nagarjuna is explaining them. And he's saying suffering, he's saying if in the first line, by exhausting karma and afflictive emotions, one is liberated. So he's saying, he didn't explicitly mention suffering, but he's saying, because when it says one is liberated, it means liberated from suffering. So he's saying, suffering comes from karma, right? And karma comes from afflictive emotions. And then, so by abandoning karma and afflictive emotions, right? I'll pull out my cursor. This thing. So by abandoning karma and afflictive emotions, then you'll be free from suffering, right? But then the question is, well, where do karma and afflictive emotions come from? And he says false conceptions, which you can also translate that term as inaccurate concepts. And that's, remember last week I was given the analogy of how, well, like when you see something as attractive, for example, like a food that you really like, although you all disagreed, or half of you disagreed with the interpretation. Remember I took a poll, I was disappointed again. That, yeah, when you see a food that appears attractive as you, although maybe I was saying maybe it works better with a person, but you see a person as very attractive and it seems like the attractiveness is from the side of the object. And we tend to believe that object, it really is attractive in the way I perceive it. It's not just a projection of my mind. And the same with unattractive. And I don't mean physically unattractive, I mean seems undesirable to us, unpleasant, or pleasant, right, to us. That it seems like those things exist from the side of the object. And we believe that. That's a kind of inaccurate concept. Believing that the way we perceive objects is the way they are in and of their own right, from the side of the object, independent of our impression of them, right? Yeah. Actually, in a way, this is kind of similar to, this kind of developing this understanding that actually the way we perceive things has more to do with our own story, our own habituation, our own ideas, our opinions, our tastes, and our projections, what we project on things, than it really has to do with the objects themselves. It's kind of impossible for us to see objects as they are independent from us, the observer, right? That just doesn't exist. The existence of something separate from the active observation of that is just it's an unreality. But coming to that understanding, in a way, it's very similar to, like okay, in the art world. You know, you think of like I'm thinking the impressionist painters like Monet or something, or Van Gogh. Then they were very much aware that the way they experience things is more to do with what they are as a person than the objects. Whereas the famous, I don't know, what's the movement before Impressionists? Like there were landscape painters or realist painters. You can think those who paint like realistic scenes, they're trying to capture like the scene, the objects, the people like as they really are, as if there's some kind of objective reality. And that was, I mean, that was it's even a Newtonian idea that there's an objective, and everyone before Newton, like there's an objective reality to the external world. And if we just take measurements and observe it carefully, we can all agree on like the facts, external facts. Whereas the Impressionists are much more about like, it's kind of like, well, there is no real external reality. There's just our individual perception of that. And so their artwork is all about kind of depicting their experience of the world, right? Which is kind of similar. It's analogous to this idea that of inaccurate concepts. That like because the kind of inaccurate concepts is that the way we perceive the world, when we believe that that's the way things are objectively from their own side, that's inaccurate. Especially you can see in relation to when we feel angry at someone and we believe, oh, they really are terrible in the way I think they are from their own side. It's not just, I think they're a bad person, they really are. Um, we only see kind of one angle, and the same when we're attached. So it's those type of inaccurate concepts then give rise to afflictive emotions of anger, attachment. And then those inaccurate concepts, they come from ignorance. And this specific kind of ignorance of thinking that, um, you know, like stick with the analogy or the example of objects, that the objects, they are something in like they are, it's kind of like they are like that person has some kind of inherent reality. They exist, like there is an essence to that person, as if that person is not a dependent arising, but they are just like we grasp at ourselves as not being a dependent arising. We grasp at others as not being, having some core essence, and then, and then we see that as, you know, good or bad or neutral, and then grasp that as being their reality, independent of our own views. And then that leads us to relating to them in this very dualistic way, where like they're like this, and then I'm just kind of seeing, oh yeah, they're bad, so then I don't like, then then it doesn't matter how I treat them, or they're, you know, they're very attractive. I really, you know, if I can, you know, be with that person, I'll be happy. So then I can't live without that. So then we get into these very dramatic ways of relating with afflictive emotions. So okay, so we have to get to meditation very quickly. So let's start. So we'll meditate in a way that we'll go in this backwards order. So we'll start with looking at our own instances of suffering, experience of, you know, different suffering experience, and you can also think happy experience, you know. But do they come from karma or not? And then does that come from afflictive emotions, right? And this is, yeah. And then we'll work towards back towards how do I exist as a person, and how does it relate to that? So get ready to meditate, which means just relax for a minute. Okay. We're not going to take a break, but because we only have an hour and a half, but just relax for a few minutes and have a drink of water or something, move around a bit, get ready to sit and focus.
Question about inaccurate perception or something. Is it, sorry, it's me.
Yeah,
Is
hi,
it,
Ladon.
yeah, hi.
Ladon,
Is
can you
it the
start again?
in,
I didn't hear from the beginning what you're asking.
yeah, when we had the slide, and when we go backward, it was after karma, and is it, I wanted to know, is it the inaccurate perception or something? Is it like to take something that it's not permanent for permanent, or like our happiness for permanent? Is it that?
Um,
Just
I
in
mean,
the slide,
so
blue
just
slide.
take to take something that is impermanent and grasp it as being permanent. That could be, yeah, that could be one kind of inaccurate conception, a
Inaccurate.
false conception here. But it's more talking And what was the second example you gave, Loda? Something that's
Like
happy?
the things are inherently existent in or out of in themselves by themselves, like they are permanent and they come from not from dependent arising, but from out of themselves.
That's the ignorance. That's the last one.
Oh, okay.
The false conceptions here are mainly where we we grasp at things as being attractive or unattractive from their own side,
From
desirable or undesirable, pleasant or unpleasant, like that, as if that's their nature, and we believe that. That's the main one. Those are the main ones we're talking about.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm. Okay, let's go ahead and start. Let's go ahead and yeah, start a bit of meditation. So get comfortable in your meditation posture. And gradually gather your awareness inwards and focus on an object of placement meditation for a minute or two, like your breath or the nature of your mind, just to kind of clear the mind and generate some mental focus. Mm. So we're going to, yeah, like I said, trace back. I'll put that slide up again, actually. So if you need to refer to it, you can, but you don't need to. I mean, but trace back the sequence from suffering back to ignorance. So begin by just observing your own, some of your own experiences of, suffering, the discomfort, which is the suffering in body or mind, or even suffering of change, the pleasant experiences which transform into uncomfortable ones. Or if you remember and are familiar with pervasive compounding suffering, the larger state of being in samsara, being under the control of karma and afflictive emotions. But just start in the present moment, in your own continuum. Observe some experiences of discomfort, disease, disappointment, or suffering in body and mind. Mm. And look upon those with compassion, I would add. The focus is not compassion, but, you know, look at your own suffering with an attitude of compassion, wishing to be free from caring and caring about and wishing to be free from. Mm. And then we ask, how is it true that those suffering experiences arise from karma? So just, check your own understanding. There's no, of course, in Buddhism, the answer is yes. But the point of asking this is to check your own understanding. And so most of you would have, reflected on this before, but just check how you relate to that question now. So again, is it true that these different suffering experiences I have, that they arise or are results of karma that I myself have created in the past? So then, if the answer is yes, then the next question is, well, this karma that I've created, is it true that I created this under the power of afflictive emotions, like jealousy or arrogant pride or selfish concern and disconcern for others, or greed, attachment, or anger, resentment, and so forth? And, to answer that question, is it true that negative karma I've created that results in suffering for me, that did, you know, is it true that I created that through the force of afflictive emotions? We can look at, the actions the karma we created in past lives. We can't see that. We can't remember. But we can look at negative karma we've created in this life. In this life, when we've engaged in actions that, deliberately harm others, or somehow, consciously or unconsciously, we intentionally harm others, or even harm ourselves, then have we done those things through the force, or when our mind is under the control of afflictive emotions like anger and jealousy, pride, and so forth? So here we have to think of different, negative karmas, harmful actions we've done, and then check, what was our motivating attitude for doing those things. Is it true that it was different disturbing emotions that drove us to do those things? Mm. And then I would add the question, um, especially because this relates very much to the last module we did on transforming problems. But is it true that all those negative karmas we carried it through the force of selfish concern, meaning concern for ourself more than anyone else, a self-centered or egotistical concern? Mm. And then the next question, these different afflictive emotions, anger, attachment, and different varieties of those, and even selfish concern. Is it true, especially anger and attachment, is it true that they arise from these inaccurate concepts? So as I was describing so the question is like with regard to anger, is it true that anger arises from seeing someone or something, the object of our anger, as being kind of inherently bad, right? Or inherently flawed or faulty in some way. And then believing that and that giving rise to the kind of the anger, the mind of anger, wishing to harm. So check that first. Maybe just to clarify, if I can, a bit, that especially here with regard to anger. So the idea of the question, does anger arise from inaccurate concepts? So the inaccurate or false concepts we're speaking about, specifically in regard to anger, is one where, Like, say you're angry at a person, the anger you're thinking about is anger at another person, that just before that anger arose, that you see the person or something about them as bad, as negative, right? Unpleasant. And then, and that we don't recognize, well, that's the way I see them, right? That's my opinion. That's my experience of them. But rather, it looks like that's how they are as a kind of objective, their objective reality. And then that gives rise to the, the more emotional response to them of anger. So check if that fits your experience or not, right? You have to be open to the possibility that this really is an accurate description of your own experience. Mm. And then look on the side of attachment. So when we have, um, yeah, when we've engaged in, created negative karmas through the force of attachment, um, then does it true that attachment comes from false concepts? And so here the false concept would be like, think of the object you're attached to, the object of your attachment. And that just before that, that kind of attachment is that mind longing to possess, longing to enjoy something, craving to have it. But just before that, the false concept we're asking, does attachment arise from this false concept, is seeing the object as pleasant, as something appealing, attractive, that by its nature has the ability to bring me pleasure. And believing that from this perception of the object as pleasant and attractive is not just my perception of it, but it's the true objective nature of that object from the side of the object, and then believing that. So in your own experience check, does it seem like attachment arises from that kind of inaccurate concept? Mm. And then another set of inaccurate concepts, because these are the ones I've described are mostly to do with the objects, the way we perceive the objects. But we also have to check with the way we perceive ourselves in these two cases, anger and attachment. So with regard to anger, we can ask, is it true that another inaccurate concept is that when just preceding the afflictive emotion of anger, when it arises in my mind, when I see the object as unattractive, I also see myself as inherently or innately averse to that object, right? So when I see the object as unattractive, I also perceive myself as kind of just objectively averse to that, something that objectively feels unpleasant about that, right? And then with attachment, the same, but in the opposite direction of when I see the object as attractive, though I also feel that myself, I'm something that a person who is just by my very nature attracted to that. So it almost becomes like there's an inevitability to it that, oh, well, that kind of thing I just don't like. And that kind of thing, oh, I really like, I want. Mm. And then the final question is the final step is it true that these kind of inaccurate concepts that at a deeper level they arise from fundamentally seeing myself to be an independent entity, right? Something that just exists from its own side or by its own power, and also the objects that I relate to, that I also see them as existing just independently from their own side, as they are completely separate from my perception or from anything else, that they seem to exist in and of their own right. So again, check with relation to instances of anger and also of attachment. Mm. Okay, so now relax your attention. And, well, maybe I should keep that up there. Well, I'll ask, are there any, I mean, I hope that brought up a lot of questions for you. I mean, I was asking you a lot of questions, but, and asking you to ask them of yourself, to think about them. But, yeah, I don't know. Are there any questions you'd like to ask or talk about?